Like I said, inshallah, we're gonna continue. Yeah, we're gonna continue studying about shaytaan, but we're gonna take a different approach or a different angle or perspective today, or a different part of the subject, I should say. So, before I introduce exactly what we're studying today, excuse me, I want to just give a thought about studying and about knowledge and how knowledge develops, not only collectively, like in a community sense, but within each one of us individually, within each one of us as we study. Um, oh, alhamdulillah. That's okay. That's okay. They're all being posted to YouTube now. So if you're missing because of work or Spotify, I'm recording the audio right now and I'm recording the video. So I'm gonna post to YouTube and Spotify, so you can find them in either place. Yeah, alhamdulillah. So for sure, I appreciate it. Thank you for saying that. That means a lot. Thank you. Um, so what I want to say about knowledge and studying and development and all these different things is, well, at least I'm going to explain it from my own perspective of how it works for me, and maybe that might resonate with you too. And that's kind of like an introduction. That will be kind of like an introduction for today's class. So for me, how it kind of works when I'm studying anything from the Quran is, there's always a beginning period, obviously, of like research, of looking up the Arabic words, going to the Arabic dictionaries, trying to figure out the root meanings of the words. So that's always like the beginning, looking up all the verses that the word is contained in and trying to see what the context is. So that's always the first stage. And for me, that's kind of like it's kind of like if you want to plant a garden and you have to kind of till the soil first. For me, that's kind of like tilling the soil and planting the seeds and then giving it time to grow. So there's also a growth period. So for me, how it kind of works is I try to do all that preparation, and then I try to step away from it for a while and do something else and kind of let it marinate or resonate within my mind. And I think that's the maturation process, where the knowledge like kind of grows and develops and matures, and your mind, your subconscious mind, kind of works on it for a while. And then what I'll notice is, as I go through that process, right? So as I start with the research and collecting the information, and then I step away from it. So that's like the tilling the soil, planting the seed, and then I step away from it and I kind of let the growth just happen by itself while I'm doing something else. I'll notice at a certain period, something will bubble to the surface, like um, a solution to whatever it is I'm thinking about or whatever I'm studying, whatever interpretation problem that I'm trying to work on. Like something will bubble to the surface, an idea, and then I'll kind of check that idea against like the verses and stuff like that. And if it makes a lot of sense, then I'll try to follow that train of thought. And so that's usually like the first stage. And then after that, obviously there's more things to look up, more verses, but also there's the teaching part of it. So I don't necessarily think, or at least how the process works for me, that you should wait till you have it all the way figured out before you start to discuss it with people, like in this format or in a one-on-one format or whatever it might be. So for me, how that works is, once I get to that point where an idea kind of comes to me about, how to think about this or a possible interpretation, and then I start to share that with people. Through the process of sharing, it helps me refine that. So say we do it in this class, and then I talk to the brother that I told you I have classes with, and I share some stuff with him. And then there's a little bit back and forth. Sometimes questions are asked, sometimes clarification is asked for. And through the process of doing that, it helps you to refine the information I've found. So it probably takes, after the initial study, after looking up the words and looking up the verses, allowing that to marinate, and then you have an insight into a possible solution or a possible interpretation for whatever you're looking at. So you have that insight, that flash of insight from the previous work. So then the process of teaching, maybe once, twice, maybe three times, after you go through all of that, then I feel like you have a lot better understanding of the subject, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to share that with you, to take you through some of my thought process of how I approach studying anything. And hopefully that could be an inspiration also for a method or an approach to study whatever it is that you want to study. That there's stages that goes through. There's a maturation stage where the information that you've taken in hasn't fully matured into a complete understanding, but you have some beginnings of insight, right? And then in discussing that with people, you can start to refine that. So I said that all to say that that's how today's class is. So the other brother that I study with one-on-one, he requested, I've been studying with him some of the stuff that we've been going over about shaytaan. So he requested to, or wanted to know about, why do we sometimes refer to shaytaan as rajeem, rajeem. And this word sometimes in different translations is translated as like accursed, right? So sometimes they say ash-shaytaan al-rajim means the accursed one, the one that's cursed, right? Is that what that means? Allah knows best. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. But he was very curious to know, what does rajim mean? Why is shaytaan sometimes called rajim? Because if you look in the Quran, shaytaan isn't always called rajim. We're about to find out, inshallah. Shaytaan isn't always called rajim. Sometimes it's just shaytaan. Sometimes it's shaytanin marid, like a rebellious shaytaan. Like there's different descriptions. So why in certain instances is shaytaan referred to as rajim? And in fact, there's only 6 times in the Quran that shaytaan is referred to as rajim. Wa alaikum salam. And only 2 of those are definite. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. What I mean is, in the past, we've talked about definite and indefinite nouns, right? A definite noun is when you say the something. When you say like the house, that's a definite noun. When you say a house, that's indefinite. So the house is definite and specific and refers to a very specific thing, or wa alaikum salam, or refers to the whole category of something. And indefinite, like if you say a house, that could be any house. That's indefinite. So in the Quran, when rajim as a description is attached to the word shaytaan, it's only definite 2 times. In other words, it only says ash-shaytanir rajim, the shaytaan that is rajim, 2 times. Other times it says indefinite, right? For example, there's one verse that says min kulli shaytan rajim, I think it is, from every shaytan rajim. And Iblis is referred to 2 times. So actually I said 6 times in connection to shaytan. That's not completely accurate, because 2 times is in reference to Iblis. And we discussed that, the difference between Iblis and shaytan, that potentially Iblis is the hidden bad quality and shaytan is when the quality comes out. So even though Iblis eventually becomes shaytan, in our study of the Quran, we want to be very meticulous with the wording that we use. So even in describing it, I want to try to be meticulous in how I say it. So the word rajim was used 2 times in the conversation between Allah and Iblis. He was called rajim. فَإِنَّكَ rajim. You are rajim. And then there's 4 other times when it's connected to the word shaytan. So we're going to read all of those and just kind of giving a beginning, starting point and introduction to thinking about this, right? So that's number 1. 6 times used in reference to either Iblis or shaytan. So 6 times total, right? 2 of those times, two of those times, Iblis was directly addressed in saying, فَإِنَّكَ rajim. You are rajim. Only 2 of those times is it used in a definite sense. Ash-shaytan al-rajim. The shaytan al-rajim. Okay, so that helps us, that gives us a starting point, because now we want to ask some questions. So I'm kind of like, I'm currently studying this. Like the first day, I mean, I've studied this before in my life. I've been Muslim for like 32 years. So I've studied different topics, right? But what I mean by I'm currently studying it is I always try to renew my understanding or knowledge of things. So if a topic comes up, I don't just suffice to say, oh, I studied that a while ago, so it means this. I'll go back and say, well, let me revisit it. Now that I've matured, maybe the last time I studied it was like 5 years ago. Now that I've matured and learned more, maybe if I look at it again, I'll come away with a different. I said I've been I've been Muslim for 32 years. I'm 49. No, I'm not only 32 years old. I look good though, so alhamdulillah. No, I'm just kidding. But you see what I'm saying? So even though this is a term, like if you ask almost any Muslim that's been Muslim for any amount of time, they're probably familiar with this term, rajim, because it's used a lot in the isti'adha, in the seeking of refuge, when people say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, right? For sure, I agree, right? But a lot of people are familiar with this term. So, so what I mean when I say I'm currently studying it is not that I'm not familiar with it, but I always try to revisit and rethink concepts that we assume we understand what it means, because knowledge grows, understanding always grows. So we shouldn't just limit ourselves to what we think we already know. We should continually revisit and rethink things. So I said all that to say that I'm currently in the process of trying to rethink and restudy these concepts. So as I'm talking through this with you, I'm talking through this for myself too. So that's a starting point though, because rajim being referenced two times in the definite sense, ash-shaytan rajim, the shaitan that is rajim, that starts us on a thought process to ask certain questions, like why in these two times are the only two times that it's mentioned in a definite sense, and what are these two times connected to? What are these two times connected to? So I'll tell you really quickly what these two times are connected to. And we're going to read all these verses in detail, but just to give you an idea, the two times that ash-shaytanir rajim is definite is in reference to the Quran. So if we go to 1698, and this is a verse we actually studied before. So if we look at 1698, he says, فَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنِ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. And when you have recited the Quran, then seek refuge in Allah from ash-shaytanir rajim, the shaitan that's rajim. So it's definite there in reference to reciting the Quran. And the other place that it's definite is in 336. So in 336, this is in reference to Imra'atu Imran. Who is Imra'atu Imran? Inshallah. Who is Imra'atu Imran? The wife of Imran. We discussed her before. If you remember, she is the grandmother of Jesus. Imra'atu Imran, the wife of Imran, the grandmother of Jesus, because she vowed what was in her belly, which was Mary. إِذْ قَالَتِ امْرَأَةُ عِمْرَانَ رَبِّ إِنِّي نَذَرْتُ لَكَ مَا فِي بَطْنِي مُحَرَّرًا فَتَقَبَّلْ مِنِّي إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. She said, when the wife of Imran said, Rabbi inni nadhartu laka ma fi batni, my Lord, I vow to you what is in my stomach. Muharraran, to be free. Fataqabbal minni, so accept from me. Innaka anta sami'ul alim, you are the hearing and the knowing. And then in the next verse, it talks about when she finally gave birth. And at the end of that verse, it says, Wa inni sammaytuha Maryam, and I named her Mary. Wa inni u'idhuha bika wa dhurriyataha min ash-shaytanir rajim. And I entrust her to you for protection and refuge, and her offspring from ash-shaytan ar-rajim, from the shaitan who is rajim. So it's definite. So in only two places in the whole Quran is ash-shaytan ar-rajim, ash-shaytan ar-rajim, the shaitan that's ar-rajim, definite. And that's in reference to reciting the Quran and the birth of Jesus, the birth of Mary and Jesus, in reference to Mary and Jesus. When Mary's mother said, I entrust her and her offspring for protection to you from ash-shaytan ar-rajim. Now, why is it only in those two places it's definite? That's something we want to think about, right? And what does it mean that it's definite? Does it mean that it's only specific to one thing, one type of shaitan? Or does it mean it means the whole category? Because that's another way that definite can be used. When you say something is the something, like when we say Alhamdulillah, the praise is for Allah. we mean all of the praise. We don't mean just specifically. So when it says ash-shaytan rajim only in these two places, the shaytan that's rajim, does it mean, which makes sense to me, that that's probably what it means. That means the whole category, anything that can be considered ash-shaytan ar-rajim, anything that can fit into that category. So it's the whole category, right? Only for these two places, in reference to reciting the Quran and in reference to Jesus. What's the connection between those? Why only in those two places? So right off the top of my head, there could be many things, right? And as we study, we might uncover more. But right off the top of my head, that's interesting because the Quran represents the speech of Allah, right? Kalamullah. And Isa, or Jesus, is kalimatan min. He's a word from him, right? He's a word from him. So is that the connection? Is that why only in those two places it's definite? Because we're talking about someone in Jesus who was the personification of a word from Allah. He was a word from Allah in flesh, basically. And the Quran is the word of Allah in book form, in verbal form, in words, in language, right? Could that potentially be why those are the only two places that uses this phrase, ash-shaytan al-rajim, definite? Because ash-shaytan al-rajim is what's going to try to take us away from the proper understanding of the word in the case of Jesus, and the words of Allah in the case of the Quran. Potentially, right? That's one thing. Also, the Quran is called ruh, a spirit, right? وَكَذَلِكَ أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ رُوحًا مِّنْ أَمْرِنَا, the Quran says. And likewise, we have inspired to you a ruh, a spirit from our command. And also, Isa, or Jesus, was called ruhun min. He was a spirit from him, right? So you see some commonalities between how the Quran is described and how Jesus is described. Potentially giving us some lessons that Jesus is supposed to represent the perfection of living the words of Allah in your life, right? And he says, Jesus is quoted as saying in Surah Maryam, وَجَعَلَنِي مُبَارَكًا أَيْنَمَا كُنْتَ, that he made me blessed, Mubarak, wherever I am. وَجَعَلَنِي مُبَارَكًا أَيْنَمَا كُنْتَ, he made me blessed wherever I am, right? And the Quran is called Kitabun Anzalnahu Ilayka Mubarakun Liyadabbaru Ayatihi. It's a book that we sent down to you, which is Mubarak. It's blessed. Liyadabbaru Ayatihi, so that they can contemplate its ayat, its signs, and its lessons. So you see a lot of commonality between Jesus and the Quran. Jesus is a word, a spirit, and Mubarak, blessed, wherever he is. The Quran is also the words of Allah. It's a spirit from him, and it's blessed, right? So perhaps Jesus teaches us how to live and be the personification of the word of Allah in our life, right? That's one of the lessons we get from his life. And potentially, that's why only those two places is ash-shaytan ar-rajim, wa alaikum salam, the shaytan that's rajim, mentioned. Only those two places. Because in order for the word to remain pure, we have to be protected from all of the evil. That's why it's definite. It has to be all of it, not just a part of it, right? Because any shaitan part in either of those two things makes impure the purity of that word and that spirit and that barakah, that blessing that it brings. And Allah knows best. That's just one thing to think about, right? So now, what does it mean when we say shaitan is rajim? What does that even mean? Because I haven't been translating it. I've just been explaining how it's used definite and where it's used definite and where it's used indefinite. But I haven't actually translated, except for in the beginning when I said how it's normally translated by people, right? But what does that actually mean? Okay. Yeah, you could say curse, you can say condemn. Those are all possibilities of meaning, right? But why does it mean that? If that's what it means. Okay? Because we don't just want, at least in this class, we don't just want to just regurgitate what's been told to us. Wa alaikum salam. We want to understand why it's like that, right? So that way, if you can understand why it's like that, then it will make more sense to you. And then when you explain it or you teach it, you'll be able to not just say, well, this is what people told me. You can say, well, this is why, because in Arabic it means this, or because this verse says that. Even if you disagree with any conclusions that we come to in this class, that's okay, because the class is not about the conclusion. It's about the thought process. That's all the class is about, is the thought process of how we approach the Quran. And so even if you sit through the whole class and you're like, well, maybe I come to a different conclusion. Alhamdulillah. But let's go through the observations, and then that way you can have the observations and you can think about it on your own. Because that's something that I do too. I sometimes watch lectures by people or listen to lectures by people that I think are very knowledgeable about the Quran. I don't always agree with their conclusions, but their observations are very precise and meticulous. So I benefit from that. Wa alaikum salam. So let's look at a couple different things about this word in reference to Iblis to understand why shaytaan is called rajeem, or to at least start to understand. So, number one, he's only called rajeem or as Iblis. So, in other words, the conversation with Iblis. So let's review this point really quickly to make it clear. So the story of Iblis and not making sujood and the conversation that occurs because of that is told in quite a few verses of the Quran. Okay? So you have it in Surah Al-Baqarah, for example. You have it in Surah Al-A'raf, chapter 7. You have it in chapter 20. You have it in 15, 38. So there's quite a few verses that discuss this story. The story of Iblis and Sujud and Adam, and why Iblis did not make Sujud to Adam. So you find that in multiple different verses. But you don't find the conversation to always be narrated the same. You find different perspectives of the conversation given in each place. So with that said, there's only two places where the perspective that's given or the wording that's used is that the conversation between Allah and Iblis results in Allah telling Iblis, you are rajeem, فَإِنَّكَ rajeem. Only two places out of all the places that this story is discussed. So these two places are in 1534. I'll read these two places for you real quick, or if you want to follow, read with me. 1534. So in 1534, he says, well, I'm going to back up a little bit so we can read the context. So he says, starting from verse 29, فَإِذَا سَوَّيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. So when I have fashioned him and proportioned him and blew in him of my spirit, then fall to him sajidin, in sujud. فَسَجَدَ الْمَلَائِكَةُ كُلُّهُمْ أَجْمَعُونَ. So all of the malaika prostrated or made sujud. We studied sujud before. So that's a long discussion as far as what exactly is sujud. Now, these two, I want to point out something really interesting too. So there, like I said, there's two places in all of the different places that the story of Iblis with sujud and Adam is discussed. Out of all of those different places, there's only two places, salam, where Allah told him, فَإِنَّكَ رَجِيمٌ, you are Rajim. And that's in Surah 15, where we're currently reading, and Surah 38. Now, what's interesting about that observation is both of these surahs are unique in other ways as it relates to the story of Iblis. And what I mean is, so what I just read was in 1529, right? So at the end of 1529, he tells the malaika, when I have fashioned him and proportioned him and blew in him of my spirit, فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. فَقَعُوا. The order given here is قَعُوا, قَعُوا, which comes from the word وَقَعَ. وَقَعَ. وَقَعَ means to fall, basically, right? If you study the word in the Quran, it has some deeper implications, but that's the Arabic meaning of it, to fall. So qa'u is the order form, the plural order form from the verb waqa'a, which means to fall. But it could also be used for something to happen or to occur, to take place. It could be used in a lot of different ways. So they're being told here, faqa'u lahu sajidin. Fall, qa'u waqa'a, sajidin. Okay? Now, in all of the other places that this story is mentioned, they're not told faqa'u, fall. They're just told usjudu, make sujud. Only in two places are they told faqa'u, fall sajidin, which is here in 15 and also in 38. So in 15 and 38, the only two places that Allah addressed Iblis by saying فَإِنَّكَ rajeem, you are rajeem, are also the only two places that the malaika are told فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. Then وَقَعَ do wuqu', fall sajidin. Okay? Another unique thing. These are also the only two surahs, 15 and 38, where the wording is وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. Yeah, no, I'm talking about surahs, not the verses. You're right about 1534. I'm talking about chapter 15 and chapter 38, the commonalities between them, right? So chapter 15, chapter 38, they're the only two places where Iblis is addressed by saying فَإِنَّكَ rajeem, you are rajeem, wa alaikum salam. Okay? They're also the only two places where the angels are addressed as saying فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ, fall sajidin. The only two places, chapter 15, chapter 38, the only two places. Chapter 15 and chapter 38 are also the only two places where the wording is وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي, I blew in him of my spirit, saying my. The only two places is chapter 15 and chapter 38. Okay? Also, the following verse, which is verse 30, فَسَجَدَ الْمَلَائِكَةُ كُلُّهُمْ أَجْمَعُونَ. All of the malaika made sujud, using the word ajma'un, all of them together. The only two places that that's used in reference to the angels making sujud, that they all made it ajma'un, is chapter 15 and 38. So I feel Allah knows best that there is a very strong correlation between these two places that could help us understand Rajim. So that's another thing that we want to think about. I don't have all the answers to that right now, but I'm just pointing out to you some observations to think about and that we're going to try to unpack probably over the next couple of days, 2 or 3 days. We'll keep studying this for a couple of days, this aspect of shaytaan. So again, to review, the only two places where Iblis is directly referred to by Allah as saying فَإِنَّكَ rajeem, you are rajeem, chapter 15, chapter 38. These are also the only two places where the angels are told فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ, fall sajidin, chapter 15, chapter 38. These are also the only two places that uses the word or the phrase ruhi, my spirit. These are also the only two chapters that use the phrase فَسَجَدَ الْمَلَائِكَةُ كُلُّهُمْ أَجْمَعُونَ, ajma'un, all of the angels. Okay, so that's the second observation. So the first observation was definite, the use of the definite, ash-shaytaan ar-rajim. The shaytaan ar-rajim is only used 2 times with Jesus and, yeah, subhanAllah. We're going to talk more about that. But it's only used 2 times with Jesus and with the Quran, right? The definite. And then Iblis is directly referred to by Allah, فَإِنَّكَ rajeem, 2 times, chapter 15 and chapter 38. And chapter 15 and chapter 38 also have many unique characteristics about the story of Adam and Iblis that are not present in other places where this same story is discussed. So that's the second thing. So we keep reading. He says, فَسَجَدَ الْمَلَائِكَةُ كُلُّهُمْ أَجْمَعُونَ. إلا إبليس أبى أن يكون مع الساجدين. Except for Iblis, he refused to be of the Sajidin. Now, I want to show you something else interesting. And I hope, inshallah, one of our goals in pointing some of these things out is I hope that it makes you, Hannah said yesterday, talked about falling in love with the language of the Quran. I really hope that's what you get from this. Even if we don't have complete answers to all of these different puzzles and observations, I just want you to I just want to show you how beautiful and meticulous the wording is, right? And you have to really pay attention to every word. So look at this. When it describes Iblis and the order to make sujud, look at how it's described here. Remember, I just mentioned a bunch of different things between chapter 15 and chapter 38 that they have in common, right? You with me? 15 and 38. A lot of things in common when it comes to the story of Adam and Iblis and sujud. So look at this here, man. This is, I don't know, this just tickles my mind what I'm about to share with you. But wait, before I share this, we have to look at something else. How is this described in chapter 2? How is Iblis's refusal described in chapter 2? Let me read it to you real quick. So, وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ أَبَى وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. So it says, when we said to the angels, make sujud to Adam, and they all made sujud except Iblis, Aba wastakbara. He refused and he was arrogant. Two things, right? Aba wastakbara. He refused and he was arrogant. Now, go to chapter 15. We're at verse 31 right now. Illa Iblisa Aba an yakuna ma'a sajidin. He refused. So in 15, it says he refused only. In 2, it says Abba was stakbara. He refused and was arrogant. In 15, it says Illa Iblisa Abba. He refused. Now, I just explained, right? 38 and 15 have a lot of commonalities, right? I listed like 4 of them, right? Now look at how interesting this is. In Surah 2, Abba was stakbara, refused and was arrogant. In 15, Illa Iblisa Abba, he refused. In 38, what does it say? It says, Illa Iblisa istakbara wa kana min al-kafirin. It like gave the other part. In 15, it gave one part, Illa Iblisa Abba. In 38, it said, Illa Iblisa istakbara. In 2, it put them both together. Illa Iblisa Abba wastakbara. That just tickles my brain because 15 and 38 have so much in common. They're like interlocking puzzle pieces. And so it just blows my mind that in 15 it's Abba, and he refused, and in 38 it's istakbara, he was arrogant, like they fit together. And in 2 they're both there. Abba was istakbara. He refused and was arrogant. So I'm going to continue trying to unpack these more and more. So going to the next verse, still in 15, we're still reading 15. He says, قَالَ يَا إِبْلِيسُ مَا لَكَ أَلَّا تَكُونَ مَعَ السَّاجِدِينَ. Oh, he said, oh Iblis, what is the matter with you that you would not be amongst as-sajidin? SubhanAllah, yeah. قَالَ لَمْ أَكُنْ لِأَسْجُدَ لِبَشَرٍ خَلَقْتَهُ مِنْ صَلْصَالٍ مِنْ حَمَإٍ مَسْنُونٍ. He said, I was not going to make sujud, SubhanAllah. It's not, istakbara is not present continuous, it's past tense in that form. Present continuous would be yastakbiru. You put the ya in the beginning of it. Present continuous means it's ongoing in the present moment, or it could be used for the future too. Istakbara is a past tense verb, meaning something that took place in the past. So he says here, I was not going to make sujud to a human being that you created min salsalin min hama'in masnoon. Which verse in 38? Sorry, I didn't give the. Well, we're gonna read that next. So just give me 1 second. Let me finish reading this part. So when Iblis refused, he said, what was the matter with you that you were not going to make sujud, right? Or be amongst those who make sujud. He said, I'm not going to make sujud to a human being that you created from these materials. Min salsalin min hama'in masnoon. Now, here is at this point, in 34, he says, قَالَ فَخْرُجْ He said, go out, get out, leave, kicked him out. Minha, from it, from Jannah. فَإِنَّكَ رَجِيمٌ. You are rajim. So when did he tell him, or let me ask it a different way. What is him being rajim connected to? It's connected to the order fakhruj, get out. فَإِنَّكَ rajim. Yeah, I didn't get to the meaning of rajim yet. I'm getting there. I'm working there. Be patient. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Istakbara has some interesting things. Istakbara actually comes from the word kabura, which means to be big, right? So istakbara, whenever you put that beginning part there, this is an increased form of the verb. We talked about this in some of our other classes. Alif sin ta means to seek something. Oh, subhanAllah, thank you. Alaikum salam. I appreciate that. It means to seek something. Like when you say istaghfara means to seek forgiveness, right? So istakbara is to seek bigness, to make oneself big. That's the root meaning, but we can discuss, like, there's many different layers, obviously, right? So some of what you're mentioning as potential meanings could be some of the layers, but the basic, like, language meaning means to seek to become big. Okay, so real quick, let's try to, because I want to go to 38. Alhamdulillah, because I promised I would give the verses from 38. Looking to exalt, right? For sure, looking to make oneself big. So he said, قَالَ فَخْرُجْ مِنْهَا فَإِنَّكَ رَجِيمٌ. He said, get out, you are rajim. So rajim is connected to the idea of getting kicked out, right? Now, let me stop and point something out real quick. The reason I haven't given the meaning of rajim is, number one, I'm still working on it, right? But I'm going to give you an idea before the class is over with of where I think this is going. But I'm leaving it untranslated because I've talked about in the past the idea of semantic fields. So a semantic field is a field of meaning. Remember, we talked about this before for those who were in the class. There was a Japanese scholar who did a lot of work with the Quran, and he talked a lot about semantic fields, meaning whenever you study a word, right, in the Quran, and you want to understand the deeper ideas of the word, not just the language meaning, but the deeper ideas, what you do is you look at the semantic field, or the field of meaning, and what that means is all the words that are also connected with that word. So if you look at a word and you see other words frequently connected with that word in other places in the Quran, then that gives you an idea that these words have something to do with the meaning of the word that you're studying. Okay? So the reason I'm not translating rajim yet is because sometimes when I study an Arabic word and I go to the Arabic dictionary, it's like really clear. So they give the definition and it fits really nicely with the verses in the Quran. So to me, it's like, okay, I get what this word means. But for me, studying this word rajim, because it's been so layered with a lot of different possible meanings that people have given it, and some of the root words, like the word rajam, is used in a certain context in a lot of Islamic discourse. Well, I'll explain that in a few minutes. For me, it's one of those words that could potentially mean a lot of different things. So my approach in a case like this is to just leave it untranslated for a while, just for a little while. It's like almost solving like an algebra equation. Like you're solving for x, so we're trying to balance the equation. So we're looking on both sides of the equation, and whatever you do to one side of the equation, you have to do to the other. So you're like, okay, and what we're trying to do is eliminate the variable by doing these operations to where eventually we understand what the variable is. So for me, rajim right now, I'm leaving it as x. It's a variable, right? I'm just leaving it as an unknown variable, and I'm looking at everything that's around it to illuminate the meaning. And hopefully at the end, we'll have a better understanding of what rajim is. So that's why I said all that to say, just to give some maybe some thoughts about if you're approaching studying something, like a way that you can approach it. So notice the words that are connected with it, right? Yeah, trusting the process, right? So here, that's why I keep pointing out what's connected with rajim here is the idea of getting out. فَخْرُجْ مِنْهَا فَإِنَّكَ rajeem. Get out because you are rajeem. Okay? So my first question in studying this that I would ask myself is, are those ideas always connected? Or are they frequently connected? Right? Oh yes, Paul, that's a good point. Like behind the scenes, right? For sure. Because it's about I really firmly believe in teaching and learning, because I don't want to make it sound like I'm teaching it like because I got it all figured out. No, I'm not saying that. But teaching and learning how to think. So that's something that personally I myself try to always work on. And then in our classes, I try to share with others. Like, let's learn how to think together, right? Let's not just learn the conclusion, because that's most of education. Most of education, they're just saying, oh, hey, this happened at this time and this is that. That's fine. It's good to know information, right? But what's even better is to learn how to think, because then you can learn anything you want if you know how to think. So that's another reason I like sharing the thought process, is because it's my own personal journey in learning how to think better, and also sharing that with others. So hopefully we can all be inspired to think better. So what I would ask myself in this case, alhamdulillah, I appreciate it. I want it to be. I want it to be. SubhanAllah. Think and learn for yourself, 100%. So in approaching this, my first question would be, is the idea of getting out always connected with Rajim, or some of the root words, or at least some of the time, which would make me think that those ideas are connected, right? The idea of getting out and being Rajim, right? For sure, showing your work. So let's to answer that question. So that's our research question. Like, if you ever read an academic study, right? They start off with research questions. Alhamdulillah. I'm glad you do, for sure. This is a beautiful experience for myself, and I really hope that it is for you too. Like, because even today when I was thinking about having this class, what we were gonna go over, I wasn't sure. I was like, should I start with Rajim, because I don't really feel like I fully researched it. I'm like, no, this is the process. This is how it works. This is how I think that you study, right? Is you take it step by step and you just kind of break things down, right? So I figured, let's just throw it all out there and let's just do it together. So so the research question then that I'm asking myself is the idea of Rajim always connected with, or at least some of the time connected with, the idea of ukhruj, of getting out? Okay. So when we go to 38, this is what we find. So starting from 38:72. فَإِذَا سَوَّيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. When I have fashioned him, proportioned him, and blew in him of my spirit, then fall to him sajidin. فَسَجَدَ الْمَلَائِكَةُ كُلُّهُمْ أَجْمَعُونَ. So all of the malaika ajma'un, all of them together, fell in sujud. إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ إِسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. Except for Iblis, he istakbara, he made himself bigger, and he was from the kafirin. قال يا إبليس ما منعك أن تسجد لما خلقت بيدي. He said, oh Iblis, what prevented you from making sujood to the one that I created with my two hands? أستكبرت أم كنت من العالين. Were you arrogant, or were you from amongst those who elevated themselves? قال أنا خير منه. He said, I am better than him. خلقتني من نار وخلقته من طين. You created me from fire, you created him from clay. قال فاخرج منها فإنك رجيم. He said, get out from there, you are rajim. So 2 times I noticed ukhruj, get out, was connected with فإنك رجيم. You are rajim. Okay? So that was, to me, I personally feel was a key insight, because I started thinking a lot about that. What's the connection between getting out and being rajim? Okay, so my next step, are there any other places in the Quran that Allah told Iblis, ukhruj, get out? There are, actually, but it doesn't use the word rajim. But that's good. I like when that happens, because by comparing those 2 places, if he said get out you are rajim 2 times, and then another time he told him get out and use different words, then maybe those other words hold a clue to understanding rajim. So if you go to chapter 7, verse 18, he tells Iblis here, قَالَ أُخْرُجْ مِنْهَا, get out from there, مَذْءُومًا مَدْحُورًا. Now, he doesn't say فَإِنَّكَ رَجِيمٌ in this place. He says, get out from there, مَذْءُومًا مَدْحُورًا. مَذْءُومًا مَدْحُورًا. 2 words. What is مَذْءُومًا مَدْحُورًا? So مَذْءُومًا is from the word ذَأَمَ, which in Arabic, I'm still researching it, but I noticed different scholars mention different meanings for it. Dha'ama. Tomorrow we'll probably go more into this because the time is getting short. So we'll pick up probably back right here. But very briefly, mad'uman madhura, dha'ama, some scholars say it means to be blamed or to be censored, which is related to the word dhamma. Dhamma, to be blamed or censored. So they say mad'um means madhmum. Mad'um means madhmum. That mad'um means to be blamed or censored. Others say it means to be humiliated. Haqqara, right? Madhuran from dahara, from the word dahara, means tarada wa ab'ada, means to be expelled and to be distant. So mad'uman madhura, one possible way of thinking about that is that it means someone who is humiliated and who is distant or expelled. So he said, ukhruj minha mad'uman madhura. Get out from there being blameworthy and humiliated and expelled and distant. Okay? SubhanAllah. So now, perhaps because when you look at 2 places, he says, فَإِنَّكَ أُخْرُجْ فَإِنَّكَ رَجِيمٌ. Right? You are rajim. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, no, that's a good point about him. Because how does shaytaan end up talking to them while they are in Jannah? See, that's another interpretation problem. And when I say problem, I don't mean in a bad way, right? So sometimes people think, oh, that's a problem. They think that's bad. But I like interpretation problems because they get your mind going. Because you're like, oh, wow, how do you explain that, right? So it's a great point. So rajim 2 times, فَإِنَّكَ rajim, after ukhruj, after get out. But this time after ukhruj, after get out, he said, mad'uman madhura. So humiliated and expelled, or pushed away. Yeah, it's a beautiful challenge, right? Or kicked away or brought far. So from all of that, a working theory, right, that hit me from those connections. Alhamdulillah, thank you. Is that rajim means someone who has been disconnected, distanced, pushed away. And what will we mean in this case? Someone who was pushed away from the more elevated, transcendent things like Jannah, like the mercy of Allah. So that's potentially why when we recite the Quran, we seek refuge, not necessarily say it, because the verse doesn't say. فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. Seek refuge from Allah, with Allah, from ash-shaytan ar-rajim, from the shaytan who has been cut off and distanced from the higher elevated things like the mercy of Allah. Now, let me hit you with this. Did you ever notice the similarity? What's the phrase that we start the Quran with? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Notice this phrase. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Ash-Shaytan Ar-Rajim. You hear how similar they sound? Ash-Shaytan Ar-Rahman. Ar-Rahim Ar-Rajim. So potentially, why we seek refuge with Allah from Ash-Shaytan Ar-Rajim in connection with reciting and studying the Quran is because the Quran is based on Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. And Ash-Shaytan Ar-Rajeem is the exact opposite energy. It's the exact opposite energy. It's the complete disconnection from Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim and the knowledge that exists in the Quran. Perhaps. I'll say that at the end because I can't say 100%. But it's interesting that the wording is so close. And one of the only places that it's definite is in connection with the Quran. Right? Yeah, like light and dark, right? Like polar opposites. Like even there's an ayah that says that connects shaytan and ar-Rahman. So for example, it says, وَمَنْ يَعْشُ عَنْ ذِكْرِ الرَّحْمَنِ نُقَيِّدْ لَهُ شَيْطَانًا فَهُوَ لَهُ قَرِينٌ. Right? Whoever I do that. Whoever becomes blind from the remembrance of Ar-Rahman, نُقَيِّدْ لَهُ shaytan. We join to him a shaytan. فَهُوَ لَهُ قَرِينٌ. Right? Alhamdulillah, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. So that's the point that I got to so far. Inshallah, I intend to pick this up tomorrow, but right now I have to go to work. So hopefully that was a beneficial start to our study of why is shaytan called rajeem. And inshallah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Let me stop. It kind of does mean, I think it kind of does mean pushed away, but pushed away in what sense? We'll talk about it more, inshallah. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.